And that ice is formed from water that's come from the oceans. And so when the ice forms on the land, the oceans are lowered. Of course, then conversely, when the ice melts on the land, it goes back into the oceans and the sea levels rise. And that's what's been happening since the end of the last ice age that began approximately 15 to 18,000 years ago. And so, and by the way, in Gore's movie, the claim that he made about how much sea level was going to rise in the future because of global warming, and of course the argument then is the warming will cause an increase of melt of the Greenland and the Antarctic ice sheets. He was even in disagreement, dramatic disagreement, with his fellow Nobel Prize winners, because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change had a dramatically lower rate of increase of sea level compared to his. So that's just further illustration of Gore's sensationalism. But even what the IPCC are doing is based on a single assumption and then projecting forward a single idea that the world is going to warm up.
I want to go back to this melting Arctic ice. One of the sentences that they wrote is, melting Arctic ice affects the climate of the entire planet. Global warming has already driven polar bears to cannibalism and may threaten the lives of a quarter of the world's population by 2100. That's heavy stuff.
Well, and of course it's got all of the good stuff in there. You know, that it's an area that nobody knows anything about, the Arctic. It's got it affecting the whole globe from this one area. And it's got these nice creatures, the polar bears with nice round eyes and white fur. And it's got all of the nasty things about cannibalism. And the problem is none of it is true. I've worked with one of the top experts on polar bears. He lives in Igloolik.
Is that Mitch?
Yes. And I've known him for 30 years, and we've written articles. Mr. Dick, I think it's Dave Dick, we published articles on polar bears in the Hudson Bay area. So I'm very familiar with the whole polar bear story. And of course, one of the things that, we'll get onto the ice thing in a minute, but one of the things about the polar bears, as with all animals on this planet, the populations fluctuate tremendously. And they fluctuate, of course, with what we just finished talking about, the wet and dry cycles. And we did research all across central and northern Canada, and discovered that animal populations fluctuating by as much as 1,000%. That's normal. What's not correct is the scientific view of animal populations. It assumes that they're relatively constant over time, and it assumes that if they crash, they simply are not going to recover. And that's an unreality. I'll just give you one quick little story with this. We were looking at northern Manitoba, and because they claimed the hydro dams, the electric dams, were destroying the Aboriginal population's lifestyle and so on. Well, there was a herd of woodland caribou called the Kaminoriak herd. In 1980, the populations were estimated to be about 7,000 animals. And the government even came in and said, you can't hunt them even though they're your fundamental food supply. You're not going to be able to hunt them. We'll provide you with food, which they did, and they've now got diabetes, but that's another story. Well, 7 years later, so 1980, 1987, 7 years later they went in and there was 155,000 caribou.
Oh, my God.
Right? And right away they're saying, we got the numbers wrong. We counted wrong. We counted too many this time and not enough the first time, and so on. And the reason they said that you couldn't hunt them was because they were down to 7,000. They were widespread. They couldn't possibly recover. And what this was based on, Kim, was in the literature, the academic literature, it said that these caribou the cows calved at 3 years old, and they had one calf per cow. What it turned out was that when the population crashed, and it crashed because there was drought in the region and vegetation disappearing, and then when the rains came back and the vegetation recovered, the animals had a catch-up factor. And what happened was that the cows started calving at 2 years old, and they started having 2 and 3 calves per cow.
Interesting.
which of course then gives you a multiple factor to recover your population. And when you start to look at populations, and by the way, some of the earliest records on ecology, and that word was first used by Charles Elton, who did studies on the relationship between the number of lynx and wild shoe hare, like a rabbit, and he used the fur trade records and showed that the populations of these animals fluctuated tremendously. And then I'm just working on an article now showing that it fluctuates in conjunction with the 11-year sunspot cycle. And so these ideas have been around, but they're still not part of the way people see things. They think that, if a population crashes, that's the end of it, but it's not the case. And both plants and animals have these catch-up factors. So when they talk about the polar bears, it's exactly the same thing. And the idea about cannibalism, of course, it's just simply a non-correct story. There was another story put out that they were wasting away, and the reason that they were suffering from hunger was because the population had exploded. There were too many animals for the region, and then when the drought came in and the food supply disappeared, well, of course, nature's going to kill some of them off. That's the way it works. And so they take little bits of these stories and, of course, sensationalize them into the stories that you're reading.
Can I give you one more before we start to go into the whole shrinking glaciers thing? So the second article says Austrian glaciers shrink. Incidentally, this was done on my birthday this year, May 8th, 2010, source Planet Ski. It says 91% of them reduced in size last year. Some of them by as much as 46 meters, according to the latest figures. The Austrian Alps Society has released the statistics and makes worrying reading for environmentalists and those concerned about the mountain landscape. The sharpest decline was some of the glaciers in the Tyrol on the mountains of I can't even pronounce this. Oh, my
God.
God.
That's in Austria. It's
Niger, Joferner.
That's where the yodeling comes from.
Yeah, Niger, Joferner, Kessel, Ferner, and Maselven Ferner. God help me with my accent. All right, the society has been studying the glaciers and their size for over 100 years. One glacier did actually grow last year, but only by a few centimeters. The melting is put down to rising summer temperatures. So when you read stuff like this, and these pieces are coming in from all over the world, it's very difficult to receive this and stand in the knowledge that we don't know what we're getting for information. We're getting bits and pieces of things. So can you lay out whatever you feel to be the truth about the glaciers and how they're analyzed, whether they're shrinking or growing? Bob Felix says they're growing. Other professionals say they're growing. And yet we get a lot of news saying everything is shrinking.
Okay. Just one quick comment was that one of the false pieces of information that were deliberately put in to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report was that the Himalayan glaciers were melting, and they'd be all gone within so many years. And it turned out that was deliberately created and put into the IPCC reports. And they had to come out and apologize and say it was wrong. And so here you've got the so-called UN official agency deliberately presenting incorrect information about mountain glaciers. But just one interesting little comment that I'll start out with. I'll pose you a question. Interesting to go back and look at Hannibal. And Hannibal, of course, was the leader of the Roman portion of the empire in North Africa. And, of course, he was from Carthage, which is in North Africa, and he came over to attack Rome. And he took elephants through the Alps in Europe, and he took them through regions that today have glaciers in them. And so if you go back to the Roman era, 2,000 years ago, the world was warmer than it is today. And so the glaciers grow and retreat all of the time, and you can show that back through history. And of course,